feral landscape typologies really started more as a result of another project, which is called invasive pigments, where I gather petals and berries and different parts of plants to make watercolor paints. And to do that, I go to a lot of what are called vacant lots, so places that humans have abandoned for one reason or another, to gather the parts that I need to make the paint. In doing that, I started keeping track of where all these vacant lots are and started photographing them, just started noticing a lot of interesting patterns. So I formalized the process and turned it into a photography series. And the kind of typology aspect is related to the history of artists working in kind of series that look at types of things. I work at the intersection of ecology and visual art, kind of an interdisciplinary practice. I moved to New York 10 years ago. Bushwick was the place to land at that point. It was affordable. I come from a rural background. I needed to find a way to connect to nature in the city, and it turned out that once I started looking at spontaneous plants, I saw nature happening in a much wider range of spaces in the city than I might have thought before, and I actually was able to kind of stop looking for nature everywhere and just substitute the idea of ecology. And Bushwick is full of these spaces. We're in the frontiers of kind of an old industrial space. There's a railroad running behind us, there's a cemetery. You see a lot of spaces that were formerly green space and potentially offering ecosystem services, holding rainwater, providing a little gap in the concrete that can actually help human mental health. There's some studies that have showed that. And these are disappearing really rapidly, and they're not necessarily thought of as green space. We don't have a lot of parks in Bushwick. I didn't think of myself as a photographer originally. I come from a painting and drawing background. I like the tradition of photography as kind of being used both in a scientific context and an art context, and that you can use it as a document of the way things change over time. I'll often kind of illustrate the changes that these spaces go through using photography. It's just a really potent way to get people to recognize these spaces. You walk by a vacant space probably every day on the way to the subway or something like that. It's easy not to notice it, but if someone else has taken the time to go there 5 times in 1 year and document what's happening there, you actually see the rise and fall of the landscape, and it's a literal rise and fall because the plants will be growing and then someone will come in and do maintenance and cut them down, and then they'll grow right back up again. I have an ongoing collaborative project with an artist named Anne Prococo, and we started this artist-run seed library called the Next Epoch Seed Library. So it focuses on plants that grow in spaces that humans have impacted heavily and then abandoned. Places where what were considered originally native plants, the plants that were here before colonization, those plants can't survive anymore because you look at a landscape like this, it didn't exist 100 years ago. The plants that live here are particularly adapted to live in challenging urban ecosystems. So we collect the seeds and share those seeds, thinking that they're the ones that are prepared for oncoming challenges. At City College, really lucky to teach a whole range of types of courses. So I taught a multimedia course, drawing, watercolor, 2D design, and in all of these disciplines I would find ways to bring the act of looking and observation into the classroom. I think my favorite example of that was actually a course for DIAP, the Digital Interdisciplinary Art Practice program, because I was able to craft a whole course called Artists in the Anthropocene that dealt with thinking about how artists function in an era where we're beginning to acknowledge, or at least try to grapple with, the idea that humans are influencing the environment on a gigantic scale. This kind of practice of going out in the landscape and gathering information and then bringing it back into the classroom and figuring out what to do with it was really exciting. And while you're out on the street doing that, you're functioning as an artist in society, and that you're ready to address people if they have questions for you. I do think of these landscapes kind of in relationship to, say, any kind of island biogeography. A plant population like this is separated by concrete from lots of other plant islands, other vacant lots, and then also isolated from the original parent population of many of these plants, which could be in Africa or Asia or Europe, so a whole literal ocean away from the original plant population. So evolving in interesting ways because they're living in isolated pockets.